Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
It's all about knowing what your goals are. I think too often we pick a tool because someone else is excited about it. But I think Airtable could be for you just to help out. Airtable could be for you if you know you have a lot of information that you typically store in spreadsheets. Like if you are a spreadsheet person, I think that Airtable is a natural next step that can really elevate what your existing spreadsheets are doing, and it's worth considering. Or if you're the type of person that's collecting information from other people and forms are a big part of what you do, then it could be worth considering. And then lastly, is just straight up, if you like it. I think there's nothing better than just getting in and seeing how it feels for you. So think about a specific project or a specific use case that you have in mind, and then try Airtable. It's completely free, and see how it feels.
You're listening to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zawrotny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping clients make space for what matters most in their lives. Join me each episode and we'll talk about decluttering, stress management, habits, personalized productivity, gratitude, and so much more. I understand the overwhelm of life because I'm a wife, mom to kids and cats, and a former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Today's episode is another in an ongoing collection dedicated to different platforms we can use to create and run systems in our businesses and lives. I began this series to emphasize that there's no one perfect platform and to ensure that you choose the right platform for you and what you need to do right now. A word of caution: don't let this information put you in analysis paralysis. It's meant to give you the guidelines you need to select and try intentionally. If you'd like to speed up that process, head to positivelyproductive.com/boost to book a productivity boost session with me. I'll help you assess your current workflow and preferences so you can decide a course of action. I'm delighted to welcome Melissa Guller to the Positively Living podcast today to talk about Airtable as a potential platform for you to collect, organize, and share all manner of information. We cover so many aspects of the platform, I considered retitling the episode to Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Airtable, but were afraid to ask. You'll come away with a clear sense of how Airtable is meant to be used and how it compares to a number of other platforms widely used by entrepreneurs. Melissa Guller is a course creator, podcast producer, and the CEO of Wit and Wire, where she helps online business owners build their authority and reach a wider audience through podcasting. She's produced multiple top 50 podcasts, hosted over 100 podcast episodes, and her podcast, Everything is Teachable, topped the charts as the #2 career podcast in America. She's a top-rated instructor at General Assembly, and she previously worked full-time for Ramit Sethi and Teachable. Melissa's a fellow organizing nerd and multi-passionate lifetime entrepreneur, a kindred spirit for sure, who has tried tons of platforms and apps to help run her business better. In this conversation, she and I talk about how Airtable is structured, the ways you can collect, view, and share information, as well as its collaborative potential. We nerd out a good bit, and Melissa's able to compare Airtable to Asana, Trello, ClickUp, and Notion. Speaking of ClickUp, you'll want to catch episode 70 with Layla Pomper to hear what she said about ClickUp, and be sure to watch for upcoming episodes covering other platforms. Welcome, Melissa Guller, to the Positively Living podcast. I am delighted you could join me.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here talking about one of my favorite nerdy things, getting organized online. I cannot wait.
The fact that we get to nerd out together, that's a great way to kick off this year. And I would love it if, before we nerd out on a specific platform we have in mind today, if you'd share a bit about who you are, who you help, and really what lights you up.
Yeah. So my background, I've always joked that I never really knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I have a music degree. I've worked in record labels. I've worked in corporate event production. And more recently and significantly, my experience has been in the online course industry. First, working at General Assembly, which is actually in person classes, and I've taught for years. Then for Ramit Sethi, a New York Times bestseller, and he has an 8-figure online course business. And then notably the last 4 years working for Teachable, an online course software, before I went out and started Wit and Wire, my very own business where I help creatives turn their skills and passions into profitable online businesses. So throughout my whole career, I've often found that one of the things that really unites these kind of separate jobs has been my background in being very organized and having kind of a producer's brain and thinking very big picture about what needs to get done and then very detailed about what needs to happen to get there. So that's why I would say being very organized and Excel, I've always had a soft spot in my heart for. I used to teach Excel classes. So that's why I think this will be such a useful episode, I'm hoping, for everyone tuning in. But in terms of what really motivates me, it's just helping others and specifically helping them earn money because I believe all of you have such valuable knowledge and we often undervalue our own knowledge. So I think that's why I wanted to start Wit and Wire in the first place, to just really help more people remove the logistics roadblocks, the tech roadblocks, and just leave nothing in the way between them getting their skills and passions out into the world.
I love that, to remove those roadblocks and to simplify, which is what we're all about here at the Positively Living podcast. And that concept that you're describing of having the big picture and then the detail oriented, that's a great example of a skill that, it's natural to you. And it's so easy to discount what's natural to us. Why is that? I don't know, but it's a thing.
It absolutely is. And it's funny because even with Excel, that's what I was teaching in-person classes for at General Assembly for 5-6 years. And I was constantly amazed by the knowledge I had that wasn't commonplace. I think when you're in it, and especially whatever your industry is, your area of expertise, it often feels like we're surrounded. It feels like everyone knows what we know. And then you go to a friend and you start to talk about this thing that is so obvious to you. And she says, wait, what are you talking about? I've never heard of that book. I've never heard of that person. And so I think there's a real silver lining in all of this to realize that there's always opportunity for you to help others because there really is so much in your brain that is not commonplace. I'm here to tell you that your knowledge is much more rare than you think. And so I think we're just too close to it. We're in it. We're really embedded into whatever our industry is that we overvalue or we expect that everyone knows what we know when it's just not true.
It's such a great reminder. It's a great reminder for me today because you're right. When we are in it, completely in it, we're also trying to learn more, to challenge ourselves. We're studying it. We're talking with others who do what we do. In my world, in my small world, there are a ton of productivity coaches, and we're all talking about all kinds of techniques and concepts and stuff like that. And of course, I bring my own vibe to it and my own perspective and lens in terms of, the holistic side of it and not doing more, but rather doing less. Still, when I step out of that and I'm in, the world in general, it's not common knowledge. It's not a common conversation, really. And I have to remind myself that what I know is helpful to someone. And you know what? Even if I know it, and someone else knows it too, sometimes they need to hear it from you specifically, right? And I think from the teaching standpoint, you probably know this really well, that different teachers have a different way of bringing that information to the audience.
Definitely. I mean, a very real life example is the fact that I practice yoga. It's one of my favorite things to do. But the teachers that I've been to over the years all give me a very different experience of a class. And there are some teachers where I think to myself, if this were my first yoga class, I don't know if I would come back. Yet they're still very popular. They have their own following. And so I think it's really beautiful that there are different teachers that suit different students. But for some reason in the moment, when we're doing our own thing, we're starting our own business, project, course, it feels like if somebody else is doing it, that it's been taken. But hopefully we can shift some mindsets to think, wow, if someone else is talking about productivity, someone else is teaching yoga, that just proves that there's space for me to do it too in my own way that will resonate with exactly my right students. So maybe that's something someone needs to hear today.
That's so good. Yeah, there's something for everyone, and there's someone for everyone in terms of teachers and guides and mentors. So with that, I am ready to be the student today and talk a bit about Airtable, which is new to me. I have certainly tried a number of platforms, not only because I'm on the search myself, but because as a productivity coach, I want to understand them better. I have experienced Airtable as a user in that kind of realm where someone else has sent me a form or something like that, but I don't know the inner workings of it. So I would love if you'd share a bit about how that became like the one for you, or what specifically you use it for, because I think you and I both understand that it's not always about the one, but you may have a primary platform that you use and why it works so well for you.
Definitely. So let me just say I've used so many different tools, and I agree with you completely, Lisa, that there's just no such thing as one tool that works for everyone. And I think that that is great because it means however you best learn, however you best operate, there could be a great tool for you. So I think our goal here is to help people explore this new tool called Airtable, tell everyone it's about, give you a sense of what it can do, and then you can go find it for free and play around and see, does this tool suit my goals? So Airtable is a database tool. A lot of people describe it as Excel on steroids. And that's how I came across it in the first place, because I have always been a power user of Excel in all of the different areas of my professional and frankly personal life. And then when you look at Airtable, it is similar. At first glance, you see a spreadsheet. It's organized into rows and columns. And although they call them bases, it is kind of the same thing as an Excel file. So a base is like the file, and then you see tabs along the top. So if anybody is thinking to themselves, I would say either one of two things. Number one is, I love Excel. I'm excited. That's great. But if you're thinking to yourself, oh, I hate Excel, this is not for me, I will say that there are some key differences between the two that could make Airtable a more user-friendly option. So I wouldn't worry too much about if like math is your thing or data is your thing. You don't need any of that background to use and appreciate Airtable. And I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of some case studies coming up, but that's what it is in a very basic way. It's a spreadsheet tool and it can be used to organize information. So that's what I would add as well is, where does this fit into my professional life and my personal life? Whenever I am working on anything, I'm always kind of asking myself, is this information part of a bigger picture? Is this one student's name within a roster of students? Is this one intake form from, let's say, a podcast guest, when I know in my heart there are many podcast guests that are going to participate in my show? And so I often joke that my brain thinks in rows and columns. But if you're thinking to yourself, I have information that I need to store, and it's something that I do regularly, podcast guests, social media posts, calendars, any kinds of information where you collect the same data on multiple different things, like different people, different posts, then Airtable could be a good fit for you.
That is such a good filter right there. I use that word all the time in terms of, is that a need? Is it something that will work for me? So the idea that, very simply, that's one action item right there. Not worrying about Excel, because it's so funny you should say that. I was like, oh gosh, Excel. I'm like, I've used it. I appreciate what it does. I like when it does the math for me. That's exciting. But I don't know if I'm like all that big into spreadsheets. But the fact that this is a little different, maybe more user friendly. So if you like what it can do for you, but bottom line, what you're saying is, if we have information that we need to store repeatedly and regularly, this could have potential.
Exactly.
That's a great starting point.
And I have another literal view on Airtable as well. So with Google Sheets, with Excel, you are seeing a table. It's organized into rows and columns, and that's the only real view that you have. But in Airtable, there are additional views. That's actually what they're called. So you could look at a table, but you could also choose to look at your information on a calendar view. You could also choose to see what they call a gallery view, where you see it's almost like squares on your screen. They can have pictures. So as an example, I've used that for a student directory, where you can see photos of students in a course. You can see their name. And then if you click on one, you can see additional information about each student. And that's private to just the students in that course. And then I think the other view that is crucial is the form view. That's the one you referenced that you've participated in. And where the form view is helpful is that the form files away information into your table. So in my example before, I interview guests on the Wit and Wire podcast. And so what I can do, instead of asking them over email, hey, can you send me a headshot? Can you send me a bio and have them send it to me in an email, what I do instead is I send them a form. They don't need an Airtable account in order to participate. And that form can collect their name, their headshot, all the info that I need. And then it actually puts it into the table that I can see on my end of Airtable. So that adds, I think, one other element to the Airtable conversation, the fact that information can be collected in different ways. And then the last piece I'll add is that you can also share pieces of information publicly without your users needing access to Airtable. So I mentioned before, I have a student directory for courses. And so as an example, in one Wittenwire program, maybe I have students submit the form so that they're putting themselves in the directory, but then I can also share a little embedded view of all those clickable squares where now it doesn't matter what other tool I'm using, doesn't matter where my students are. I can show them that Airtable base. They can't edit anything, but now they have the view only access to the students in the course. Or if I had a list of my favorite resources, I could make a view only little black book. So there are a lot of different ways that you can share just pieces of the information publicly with a group and collect information, all without them needing their own Airtable account.
Wow. Okay. And so you can do the view only thing. So again, that's like the idea that they can't edit it, but they're just taking a look at it. And it could be different views. So you could share a calendar view or whatever view there is, you could technically share. That's an uneditable. That was easy for me to say. I probably could have said that simpler, but a version of it so that they can't touch it, but they can look at it.
That's exactly it. And even to maybe layer on this concept of views, let's zoom out. So I said before, you have one file and it's called a base. And that base could have multiple tabs in it. So maybe if we're going along the lines of a course, maybe you have one base because you have an online course or you work with clients, you have some kind of people. So maybe one tab is all the people. Maybe you have a second tab that could be your organized outline of the course. You could have a third tab where you collect questions from students. You can use different tabs in different ways. But if you just imagine one tab, let's just think about the students or just think about your clients, just the people. What the views can do is show you just part of the overall data in one place. So you could say, these are just my active clients, or these are just my inactive clients. This is similar to sorting and filtering if you are familiar with Excel or Google Sheets. But the difference is that it's saving the view. So along the left, imagine you could just have something that says active clients, inactive clients. You can create different views that look like tables, but you can also create different views that look like a calendar, that look like a Gantt chart, that look like a Kanban board, the way that people imagine Trello or Asana. So there are a lot of different options. And I think the other very helpful example we can talk about is social media planning. Let's say that you have Instagram and, for simplicity, Twitter. Let's just pretend you have two different social media platforms. What you could do is create an Airtable base, and then every single row in one tab represents the post. So the post has a date that it goes out. You could have one column that says, this goes to Instagram or this goes to Twitter. So now we have a filter of sorts where if you wanted to just see your Instagram posts or just see your Twitter posts, because you've had that column give you two options, now you've got different views. So that's one column. Then maybe you have one column for the caption. You have one column where you could even put the graphics in. Like if you're working with other team members, they could be uploading graphics for you to approve or to look at, or even just see visually what's going on. And then there are two other things you can do with this same set of data. One is you can view it as a calendar. So one of the tough things I think about planning your social media in Google Sheets, let's say, is that it's not very easy to visualize. You can't really see like, when is this post going live? I can't tell what's going on. But in Airtable, you can work out of a calendar view. You're literally looking at the calendar for January. And you can click onto, let's say, January 11th and put a post there and then add all your info. And so I think in a lot of ways, it's much more visual because you can see exactly what the calendar will look like of all of your posts. And then the last view that I think is really helpful is the Kanban view. That's what people think of when they think of Trello, moving things in different columns. And that can be your status. So what's the status of this post? Has it not been started? Is it in production? Is it live? What you can do is view that information where all of the upcoming posts for you to work on, let's say they're all the way on the left. Then you can move the ones for this month into in progress, and then you could just work on those. And then when they're ready or they're scheduled, you can just move them through your series of steps. So even if you aren't using all three of those views for one concept, I think this example hopefully can showcase the fact that the table view is very useful to see all of your data in one place. The calendar view is very useful, I think, for either visualizing when your posts are going out or just seeing upcoming events. And the Kanban view is a more practical approach, I think most commonly used to track statuses, but it could also be used to categorize if that's useful.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And that's a great example. I was about to ask. So you absolutely read my mind that that was something that I think so many of us have in common in terms of trying to organize some kind of posting or some kind of interaction on social media. The content organizing, I think, is a big challenge for entrepreneurs. And this sounds like it's extremely versatile, but again, it's all the same gathered content, and then you can view it in different ways. Now, there are some similarities in what you're describing. So you've got the Kanban, the calendar, the table view. Is there a list view as well?
Here is where I think it is different from, say, Asana,
Right.
because Asana has a list view, a table view, a calendar view. So a lot of the same words that we've been using are true in Asana. But I actually use Asana and Airtable in my business. And the reason why is because I use Asana to track tasks while I use Airtable to store information. So I think that's the key difference between Airtable and a lot of the standard like task management options. I do not go to Airtable to figure out what I'm doing today. Instead, I start in Asana. I often joke that Asana runs my life, but I'm the one putting in the data. So it is still me at the end of the day. But I base all of my daily tasks and weekly planning out of Asana. But a lot of those tasks are linked to information in Airtable. So that's where I store all of my, let's say, my Instagram planning, because I'll have an Asana task that says it's time for you to plan this month's content. And then I'll put that content into Airtable. Or I mentioned collecting info from podcast guests. I think that's how I see them fitting in and why they can both be useful. Because what Asana doesn't do very well is retain a database. It would be very hard to go back and to see what have I collected from my podcast guests in the past without clicking into individual cards or tasks in Asana. But then on the other hand, with Airtable, that table view I think becomes really valuable because you can see all of the information from all of the people or all of the like the rows, if you will, from a project that you're working on. So that's how I see them as being very different.
Yeah, that's a really helpful description because now my mind is going a mile a minute here, thinking about the other comparisons as well. And you and I've talked about this. So you have Asana, there's also ClickUp. Notion, you mentioned Trello, and you're right. So each of those have different styles to them. And that's why we're talking about each of them to kind of see what do you prefer. And I did have quite a bit of time that I used Trello because I do enjoy the Kanban elements of, and you're right, the status is really big for that, where you're visually moving. It's like moving post-it notes on a board and you're like, okay, this is now in progress. And that's helpful. But the big picture view or storing the content, it sounds like that is really on point for Airtable. And that was something I struggled with in Trello. I feel like ClickUp has gotten better. And we talked about this with Layla Pomper. So she's described some of these as well. And her example is that she uses ClickUp, but she keeps her life organized in Notion as well. Now, have you tried those too?
I have. I've used all of the above. I'm a total nerd. I really enjoy trying new tools. And I think if I were to loosely group them, I would say Asana, Trello, and ClickUp are task management tools. The core thing that they do really well is help you break a complex project or regular tasks into manageable chunks that you can accomplish during a set moment in time, like a set day with a due date. On the other hand, Airtable and Notion are primarily databases. They store information. And although both of them have functions that you could use them to set deadlines, I would say that's not their zone of genius. That's like not the main thing they're used for. So I think many of us, both professionally and even personally, would use a combination of one of each. Like, for example, I use Asana plus Airtable. I do also use Notion quite a bit just because as a course creator and someone who teaches about course creation, I tend to make templates and options in all of the above. But I think that between Airtable and Notion, maybe I can offer what I think the biggest difference is. So I think that at its heart, Notion is a note-taking app, and it is built on you creating a system of folders that have notes inside. But what's interesting is that those notes can have different formats. So some of the notes can be organized as tables. And once you hit that point, once your note is a table, then that table is very similar to Airtable. And that's why they are so similar, because they can both be databases and have a lot of pros and cons. But I think what Notion can do really well is that Notion organizes notes, right? So it is a table of notes. If you click into any row in your table, it's an individual note. So for example, if you wanted to really map out like a full YouTube script, let's say, maybe you have a Notion table of all of your YouTube videos, but each one has more real estate where you can really write out a document's worth of a script. Now in Airtable, you could have a field called script and you could do the same thing. But I would say it's not built as well to have very long fields. If you're familiar with Excel, you can just start to imagine as the field gets a little longer, it's a little more unwieldy. But I think that what Airtable does better is that there are just some additional like true table features, like filling a whole column with the same information. There's just like little table things that I think Airtable does a little bit better. And it has forms. Notion, as of our recording, does not have that form ability for somebody else to input data into your database. So they're very slight differences, but hopefully that's a helpful comparison.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to step back Layla and I discussed this as well, and I love that you're bringing this to the tables to really truly understand what it is you're trying to accomplish when you're looking at these platforms, because there are many common features. Like the thing that you're talking about, because I've worked in both Notion and ClickUp, that they have in common is when you are, clicking on a line and you have this, I don't quite want to call it a pop-up, but it's like your cursor kind of indicates that you have some choices. You can make a bulleted list or you could create a new document. And those are really cool features, and not just cool, but they're very useful, but the way the information is then stored for you to access it, I think it's critically important to understand how you want to be working with that later.
Exactly. If I were to do one sentence, I would say that Asana, ClickUp, and Trello store actions, while Airtable and Notion store information.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, speaking of storage, one of my questions that I was curious about that I haven't been able to figure out completely, I'm still researching it. If you know anything about it, I'd love to hear, is how, especially with Airtable, information is backed up or protected since we're storing our lives in here.
Yeah, great question. So, as far as I know, it's fairly similar to Notion, Evernote, all of the different options that are these databases we've been talking about, where it's backed up to a cloud. And depending on what you want to pay Airtable, they have different lengths of time that you can access previous versions of your data. So, on the free version of Airtable, which spoiler is what I recommend for basically everyone. I actually still use the free version of Airtable just because I pay for too many tools in my life. And although the paid features are nice, a girl has to draw the line somewhere. So on the free version, you get 2 weeks of revisions. And then I don't know about like what happens to the data that is prior to that. I imagine it is still in Airtable's universe in case you pay them later. But if you are on the paid plan, they store it longer. I believe it's a year. Then in terms of how well it is like secured, that I don't know about, and it is a great question, but I can't imagine it's much different than what Notion is doing. Like, I don't know if you know more about that, but I imagine that they would have similar answers.
Yeah, I had a hard time figuring out how much Notion held on to or protected the data or in terms of their own backup. So again, I can't say this for sure. We want to do our own research on this and we'll continue to do so. But it almost sounds like Airtable's a little stronger in that department, but we'll have to double check that. The other thing too, is there a way to easily download this information since you have it in table format?
Yes, great question. You can download the entire base or you can download an individual tab. And what's nice about that is, although we've talked about the fact that you can view it as a table or view it as a calendar and all these options, when you download the info, it's downloaded as a CSV file. I think there are other options as well, but CSV is the most universal, where if you wanted to import it into another database tool, or even if you wanted to do something in Excel, let's say, you would be able to do that very easily. And the opposite is true, where you can actually import CSVs or import Excel files. So if you were a very power spreadsheet user and you were curious to see how it could be different in Airtable, then I think that that could be worth trying. Maybe we can briefly give some differences, how it's a little bit enhanced compared to a spreadsheet.
Mhm.
I would say some of the biggest differences are just the ability to see your data in user friendly ways. So, for example, in a Google Sheet, you could have your 20 rows, let's say, and imagine that there are 3 different statuses: upcoming, in progress, and done. Well, in Airtable, if you want, you can do what's called grouping. So you could see almost like 3 mini tables, like one of the things that are upcoming, and you can collapse it so you can just see the category top line. Like it's kind of like rolling up a budget. That's the best way I would describe groups, where when you have it all minimized, you see just 3 big categories for the status names: upcoming, in progress, and done. But then you can see the rows under it. So I think it creates a much more user friendly view of everything you have going on. And I think that the benefits of Airtable also extend to the relationships between records. So let me talk about that a little bit. So let's say before I mentioned that I might have a base for one of my courses. What I often do is I have one tab for all of the people in it, so all of the students. Then at different points in my courses, I actually like to check in with people. And so when they submit a form, when they include their name, it will tie their question to their student account. So, in a more literal way, if I'm looking at the roster, I can look all the way to the right and I see a column with all the questions they've ever asked or all the student checkpoints they've ever submitted. So, it's very easy for me to get a holistic picture of what all of my students are up to because there are links between each of these options. I would say maybe a different example that could be more accessible is to imagine albums versus songs. Let's say that you had one Airtable tab that were albums, and then you had a different one that might be songs, or maybe let's even do artists. I think that's a bit easier to picture. If you imagine on the artists tab that you could click into a cell and you could choose albums from the other tab, like a drop down effect. Now you've effectively organized your list of artists, and then you've clicked to associate all of your favorite albums so that you can see them all in one place. That's the power of relationships between databases. So there's some very cool stuff that you can do in Airtable.
Right. And so in the whole concept of a relational database and having that connectivity, would I be correct in saying that it eliminates the silos that can happen, right, in your business and everything being sort of separate? You're creating all these separate spaces. And then you're like, but how do they work together? And that's a really important question that we need to ask, not just for business, but for our entire life, right?
Exactly. And I think where it's also useful is just thinking about how can I not enter the same information twice? Like something that's always on my mind is if I feel like I'm typing in the same exact information in multiple places, odds are good it should be living in some kind of database. So maybe that's a useful framework as well.
Yeah. And of course, I'm going to be over here cheering that immensely because can we just keep it simple? And so, yeah, type it in once and don't mess around. Okay. Next question. And this is sort of relational in a different way. But what are the collaboration potentials? You did mention being able to share any kind of view and have it so that, someone isn't editing it, but maybe viewing it. But what are the collaborative options for Airtable?
There are quite a few, and it's very flexible. So imagine that you have an Airtable account. It is called a workspace. So my business is called Wit and Wire. I have a workspace called Wit and Wire. And so if you have somebody who works with you on your team, let's say, you have the option to give them access to either the entire workspace or just an individual base, an individual file. So you have a lot of flexibility there. And then even within a single base, you can grant access at a pretty granular level to different parts of it. So whether you have somebody who is editing with you, editing, I mean, they're actually inputting data. It's that example from before of the social media management where maybe you have somebody designing graphics, maybe you have a virtual assistant where what you're doing is you're just getting it started, you're writing the captions, and then it's up to them to create graphics or even to schedule them. Then you could be collaborating internally in the same way that you can share with an internal collaborator. You can also work with clients. If for some reason that was a fit, like you can choose that you have a base for a particular client project. But then I think the power of collaboration also extends to the view side of things, where before I mentioned that you can just share a singular view with other people. We talked about the student directory as one example, but I think that the power of the forms as well kind of comes in here, where you can ask yourself, do I need this person to edit and view the entire database, or do I just need to collect information from them? So if you just need to collect information, they do not need an Airtable account. You can just send them a direct link to the form. It's only if they are actually working with you behind the scenes and need to see all of the data or even edit some of the data, then they would need to be invited to the base itself.
Yeah, those are definitely different levels of collaboration, not just you're accessing it or you aren't. But again, it's making the distinction of, are we trying to gather in information? Are we trying to review information, have the potential for someone to edit it or to provide feedback? Okay, great.
So, on the theme of collaboration, and I mentioned this view only access, I said you could send a link to, let's say, a form. You also can embed things from Airtable fairly easily. So, to give one example, most people are familiar with the concept of a contact page on a website. You probably have a form that's already doing that. But to give you a different example, you could actually get a code from Airtable. They give it to you. You don't need to know any coding. You just need to know how to copy and paste. You could put that on your website to collect information directly into an Airtable. Or I embed forms into my courses to collect checkpoints from students. So it's really interesting to think about the options that gives you, because you can embed a form, that's one way, or you could embed the concept of a directory we talked about. So as an example, one of my courses is about launching a podcast. And so when you launch, you get to add your show to the directory. So all students can see a table view of all of the podcasts. They can see the cover art. They see a link to go listen. The newest release is at the top. And so I have embedded that Airtable experience into the course, where students may not even realize what tool I'm using. So I think that's what's kind of interesting about it, is this embedded quality almost makes it feel like your Airtable work is part of a different tool.
Yeah, there's a lot of flexibility. And it sounds like it's not just the flexibility of the information you're providing, but again, it goes back to sort of the viewing, not only the different types of views, but the fact that it can fit seamlessly into another platform.
Exactly. And that's the real difference, I think, as well, between Airtable and Notion. I mentioned before, Notion doesn't really have the form ability. So I think if I were to say to someone, if your needs are not just collecting information and not just storing information, but also sharing that information, if you have all three, the form, the embed, and seeing your data, then I think that Airtable could be a great option.
And I will say that Notion, you can really create a visually pleasing platform, which is beautiful. There's kind of, it's almost like a web design vibe to it. Does Airtable have options in terms of not just the views that you're looking at, but customizing them in some way?
So I love Notion. I'm very familiar with it. And I would say that Notion is a little more, as you're saying, website-y, for lack of a better word.
We're making that word up now.
It's a word. It's definitely, we all know what we're talking about. It's website-y. With Airtable, you can make it look very aesthetically pleasing, I would say, because in addition to sharing a table view of rows, there's some color coding that you can do, like the statuses.
Right.
Unlike just a straight up spreadsheet, they look like little colored pills inside of the cells. Like yellow could be in progress, green could be that it's live. So you do have some color functionality as well as actual images. So I mentioned the ability to see a gallery of like the podcast cover artwork, where it could appear to be like a clickable group of cover artworks for podcasts. So it's not quite as pretty as Notion, but it's definitely aesthetically pleasing to look at.
That's fair. Okay, so with that, the only other thing I was curious about, and this might work really well for us to kind of wrap up if there's something else that you want to share about Airtable. I was kind of curious in terms of you using it. You did mention that Asana helps you track what you're doing from a task standpoint. And then Airtable is, your database information housing, if you will. Is this for not only your business, but your personal life as well? Or what do you also add in if there is something different?
Ironically enough, I do use Notion more in my personal life. I think because it is a note-based platform. And so even for example, my sister, who is a designer, has a place in Notion where she saves recipes. and she's really made it look beautiful, and she's shared it with our family so that we can all see them as well. And so one thing I will say about Notion is that it is connected to a web clipper feature. So I do still use Notion actually in both business and personal life because Airtable doesn't have that web clipper feature. If you're doing research, you want to save some blog posts or some YouTube videos that you're reading, I'm a big saver. And so I think that that's where Notion kind of fills a void that used to be filled by Evernote. I was a big Evernote user for a long time.
That's actually where I still keep recipes. So along those lines, and you did mention Evernote real quick. So I just wanted to give it a shout out. It's still there. It still has its place, but similar idea. But Notion, again, similar to that, but also has the potential to really, I guess, visually pleasing platforms are your thing. I could see using Notion for that.
Definitely. I think that Notion is probably slightly more expansive than Airtable, only because of things like the web clipper saving things indirectly, and the fact that, again, Notion is a note based platform that happens to be able to be organized as databases, while Airtable is a database. Like you are building tables when you are working with Airtable. And so the only other thing I think that's worthwhile to mention here is that I do still use like Google Drive for a lot of my business and my personal life. And that's far from the newest trick in the book. But when it comes to actually creating different agendas, presentations, just organizing what I'm doing for my business, I do still create much of what I do with simple like Google Docs, Sheets, and slides. So I think that's not going to go away anytime soon. But those are the main things that I would say I use both for business and personal life.
Excellent. Okay. I think that's a great place to wrap up. You've given us so much to work with and to consider, and a reminder too, that again, it's not always about having the one thing, but it's about using the right things for the right reasons.
Exactly. And I think it's always worth trying something new out. But ultimately, if you start to keep using all these different tools, a problem I know I ran into that I'm guessing other people will face is then your information feels like it's chaotic, where the internet clutter effect I feel is very real. It's like all of your things are just in too many houses and too many rooms. So I think it's far better to commit to a tool that you like and just remind yourself that there is no perfect tool, there is no such thing. And it's okay to get excited about the prospect of trying new tools, but maybe give yourself like a time limit. Say, I'm going to try this for a month, and then I'm either going to decide I'm going to use this or I'm going to go back because this didn't add value. And I loved what you shared earlier. It's all about knowing what your goals are. I think too often we pick a tool because someone else is excited about it. But I think Airtable could be for you just to help out. Airtable could be for you if you know you have a lot of information that you typically store in spreadsheets. Like if you are a spreadsheet person, I think that Airtable is a natural next step that can really elevate what your existing spreadsheets are doing, and it's worth considering. Or if you're the type of person that's collecting information from other people and forms are a big part of what you do, then it could be worth considering. And then lastly, is just straight up, if you like it. I think there's nothing better than just getting in and seeing how it feels for you. So think about a specific project or a specific use case that you have in mind, and then try Airtable. It's completely free, and see how it feels.
That's an excellent suggestion. As a matter of fact, the recipe thing was how I started with Evernote in the first place. And then you decide what fits, but really sound advice to say, don't get yourself spread too thin, where just like you don't want your content kind of everywhere, or the things that you're working on spread out. You know, that can happen with platforms as well. So it is important to consolidate, but again, making sure you're using the right tools for the right things. Okay, with that in mind, before we get into a rapid wrap up, tell us quickly where we can find you online.
You can find me anywhere at Wit and Wire. Instagram is the primary social media channel that I use. And I also have a podcast, of course, and a YouTube channel where I offer online business tips for course creators and other online business owners. So everything is always at Wit and Wire. And I would love to share all the tips on all of the nerdy tools and more that I cover on all my channels.
I will be sure to have those links in the show notes so we can all nerd out together. Now, you ready for a rapid wrap up, Melissa?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, please fill in the blank for me. A song that lifts my spirits and makes me dance is?
Piano Man, maybe an unconventional choice, but it's definitely sentimental.
But it's Billy Joel.
It's
I'm
Billy
all
Joel.
about
How could you
that.
go wrong?
You cannot go wrong with Billy Joel. That is my completely objective opinion. So I'm going to add the Piano Man to the Spotify playlist, the Positively Living Podcast, Spotify playlist volume 3. Okay. How about a quote or a mantra that inspires me that I share often?
I think generally, I just always think that things are built one day at a time. That was a mantra I had in my yoga practice early on, where you just see everyone around you and they're doing handstands and they're so advanced and you think, how can I get there? And so I was just like, strength, it's just built one day at a time. And I think the same is true with business or any personal goals that you're working towards. So just give yourself kindness. It's not going to happen overnight, but little things will add up.
Love it. Okay. How about a resource, book, or app besides Airtable that has made my life better?
Oh man, I mean, I think that this is a terribly biased answer. I'm going to give it anyway, but I use Teachable to run my course business, Wit and Wire. It is the company where I worked for 4 years, but it's just incredible how much online courses have changed my life, both from giving me the professional opportunity to work at the software company, to help other course creators build their businesses. And now here I am running my own business full time, all thanks to the power of selling courses online. And so I just can't really say enough about Teachable. They didn't pay me to say this. It's such a gift, I think, to be able to do what I love and to get paid for it by helping others. So I just feel really lucky.
Wonderful. Okay. And last but definitely not least, what or whom are you grateful for today, Melissa?
I always feel so torn. I'm like my entire family, but I was just fortunate enough to spend more time with my family. Again, thanks to the power of having a location independent business. One of my big motivators was to be able to travel and see family more. So I'm just really inspired by my own family. They're always so hardworking, but really humble about it. I grew up in this family of a lot of entrepreneurs. I was the only 8-year-old I knew who knew how to spell entrepreneur, because that's what I told people my dad did for work. But I think that the way that my family carry themselves, and it's always about like really serving others and being helpful, is something that I've always just brought with me into my work. And so I just feel grateful always for them, but they inspire me to keep going too.
Well, first of all, you can never do gratitude wrong. There's never a wrong answer. But I'm so glad that you mentioned your family today, because what a beautiful story and an inspiring one. Thank you for sharing that. And I will say I am so grateful for you, for connecting with you, and for you coming here today to share so much of your wisdom and your experience. Thank you, Melissa, for shining your light in this world and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.